Hi everyone, and welcome to this Grattan Institute seminar on how we build back better after COVID. I'm Danielle Wood, I'm CEO of the Grattan Institute, and I'm delighted to introduce our moderator today, Dan Ziffer, known to many of you from your TV screens, ABC journalist and host with the mostest.
Thank you, Danny. It's wonderful to be here in the real, as they say on Bluey. We have an eminent panel who you can see with us, Alison Kitchen, Chairman of consulting firm KPMG, and Rebecca Castles from Curtin University, eminent economist. We have so much to talk about. I would like to, first of all, acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respect to their elders. Come to you, obviously, in a really interesting week. We have a fascinating hour to get through. We will get straight into it. I will thank my colleague who called on Monday and described it as International Enraged Women's Day. And certainly, whilst I'm honoured to be hosting this event, there has never been a week where I have wanted to less speak at eminent women. So I really do thank you for being here, for listening to what's going to be a fascinating discussion. Please do use the Q&A feature. We'll be getting to questions towards the end of the hour. And as we go through the information about the problems that exist, the kind of structural issues and how they might be solved, if at any moment you feel the need to go to your nearest window and scream, please just put yourself on mute. This is what the organisers have asked. So we will get to it, but we'll start just by introducing our panel and then getting them to make a key observation about the year. Alison Kitchen runs KPMG. Australia nominally has 3 levels of government, but I always slip the consulting firms in at about 1.5 between federal and state. We're talking here with someone who manages a company that is deeply enmeshed in business and government in the process of change and of $100 million and billion-dollar systems that make things happen. So, Alison, thank you very much for your time for joining us today. There's always been so much in the past year, but in the field that you work, in what you've seen, what have been your key observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key observation has to be just the pace of change. Every week has been a new crisis, and all levels of business and all levels of government have really, I think, responded very well and quickly. And if there's one thing I reflect on the whole year, there was just a constant evolution. What needs to happen this week? What's the crisis of the moment? Whether it's really big stock market issues around remuneration, whether it's toilet paper and the supermarkets needing to step up, whether it's shutting down borders at a moment's notice and people being trapped. I would say that constant evolution and constant need to be changing has been the feature. And for us, of course, that's translated into a really big mix of crisis response work at all levels of government and the private sector, and of support of just the tsunami of changes that have come across, particularly areas like banking, supermarkets and those, as they responded to things. And whilst I think the pace has changed now, as things are starting to open up, perhaps stabilise, I hate to use the word normalise because I'm not sure that we're ever going to get back to the old normal. I think the pace of that has slowed a bit, but I would still observe that lots of things are constantly changing and people are experimenting, and I think the experiments are going to happen for a while.
Thank you for that. Also joining us today, Associate Professor Rebecca Castles from Bankwest's Curtin Economic Centre in Perth. Obviously, so much has happened. You've been able to observe it from Perth, which has had, in some ways, a different experience in the world kingdom of Western Australia. What's been your key observation from the year?
Dan, look, I think there's a few, but the big one for me really over the last 12 months, because we're sort of hitting that 12-month mark now when the pandemic sort of first broke out. The big one that I kind of reflect on is that anything's possible, that we can make really big policy changes really quickly. We're a wealthy nation, we're a very capable nation. We can lift unemployment benefits up to a livable income level. We can support workers if they are unable to work. We can support businesses. We can make childcare free. We can do all of these things, and we can do them quickly, and we can work together really, really quickly to make these things happen. Businesses, they transform the way that they worked so rapidly. The innovation gains, I think, from last year are going to be huge. The possibilities, the way that we can work differently. I think the other observation, though, that came out of those big policy changes is that we don't apply a gendered lens enough. We miss things if we're not looking at the impact analysis, and we're not looking at how these policies might impact differently for men and women, because men and women work differently. We have different lives. It's starting to converge, but realistically, men and women have different lives. And we saw that through policies like JobKeeper, and that it wasn't eligible, that many women weren't eligible to access JobKeeper because they were working as short-term casuals, more likely to be working in those industries that were impacted very, very heavily. And so they missed out on keeping that connection with their employer. And I think the final observation that we saw in this last year is that it took a pandemic for essential services, or for a service like childcare, to actually be deemed an essential service. And I think that's a good thing, but it's also a little bit telling about how we value women's work and how we value these services, that we didn't see them as essential economic infrastructure. And now I think we have started to actually view childcare and other care services in a different way.
Thank you. Sitting next to me, Daniel Wood, who's the CEO of the Grattan Institute. Your key observation from the year?
Look, I think it's difficult to go past the ones that have already been made. I would just echo both Alison and Rebecca there about, I think what it tells us about what we can do, as well as the adaptability of our society and our institutions. So when you look back, that idea that you would have federal and state governments coordinating on a health response, including how we manage closing our borders. We rolled out telehealth that we've been talking about for 2 decades in the best part of a few weeks, a wage subsidy scheme in 3 weeks, businesses that told staff that wouldn't be possible for them to work from home in the past, all of a sudden, again within weeks, had all of their staff working remotely. We had families doing major flexing in roles as well, particularly homeschooling, but big rise in unpaid work. Even though, as we'll probably come to, it was disproportionately borne by women, we had a lot of men stepping up and doing serious caring work for the first time. So I think a huge amount of flexibility, and as Rebecca said, I think it shows what we can do when we need to. So I think there is some real optimism coming out of the fact that we can adapt, and when we're forced to, that business, government and families can change.
To work in all three of those observations about the adaptability, about what is possible, about how the pace of change, whilst very rapid, is now slowing into, I won't say normal, but normal-er kind of environment. Alison, how much is the response from now, as we move out of the emergency response, and Australia has done fantastically well in the health response, we move to kind of transitioning off these very substantial subsidies and things like that. How much of the response and the way forward seems to be fighting the problems of the last recession we had 30 years ago, which was about full-time male employment, where we're seeing such a decline, such a sledgehammer hit to the kind of occupations and the kind of work that women do?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of positive to what you said, Daniel. I think I'm inclined to agree with you. We were, for example, particularly frustrated that the government didn't focus more on social housing, because that is predominantly would benefit women. The infrastructure spend, as you said, is aimed at stimulating a part of the economy that perhaps hasn't been so hard hit and which is already coming back very quickly. We would like to see that the investment going in the areas where jobs were lost, which is hospitality, arts, recreation. I think for me, the other thing that we can focus on right now, in light of the aged care report, which has just come out, is that caring opportunity, which there's clearly a need for, and where women are the predominant participants in that sector of the workforce, that is very clearly going to need to be an area of real focus. And I would hope that as we start to think about solving the problems of aged care, we really focus on opportunities in that workforce and opportunities for structural change in that workforce, to some of the points Rebecca made about insecure work, part-time, low paid, and really focus there. So I think that's right, Daniel, that focus solely on infrastructure is challenging. But I don't want to be too critical, because I think, as you said, what's been done very well so far is maintaining stimulus in appropriate areas to keep public confidence high and therefore spending high. And as that support is withdrawn, it's important to keep the targeted subsidies in the areas that will maintain not just employment and those businesses, but importantly maintain confidence for the whole economy. The other thing I would say, which of course has been incredibly difficult, is that women, much more than men, withdrew their super. They withdrew it earlier, they withdrew it more wholesomely. And that, I think, again, reflects some of the things Rebecca talked about in insecure work, and why, again, that focus needs to be much broader. I wholeheartedly agree with Rebecca's comments about having a gender lens to every aspect of economic policy. And I hope that's not just a post-COVID, but I think that's something that we should do permanently. And if we did, we wouldn't have anywhere near that focus solely on infrastructure that we seem to have at the moment.
Rebecca, we've done incredibly well in the health response, but a lot of the industries that are still going to struggle for at least a short to medium period, things like tourism, accommodation, events, the arts, those industries are dominated by women and by female employment and have certain type of profile of the employment in them. What would be of assistance in those sectors? Clearly that the government is banking on essentially a vaccine strategy, that the whole world will get vaccinated and we'll get back to a kind of more normal period. But that's not going to happen for some time. What do you think would help those sectors which are predominantly employed women?
Look, I think a couple of things, and we have seen state governments and now the federal government actually deliver some assistance in these areas through subsidising flights and through subsidising sort of tourism vouchers. So I think that does help to a degree, but it's a sort of a short-term fix. So until we actually see those markets able to re-enter Australia, those big international tourism markets, we're actually going to see continued challenges, I think, for those sectors. Here in WA, we are seeing, and I think in Australia more broadly, we are seeing a substitution effect. So we're seeing the domestic demand pick up that international demand that no longer exists. But that's not filling every gap, and obviously, a lot of businesses are really doing it pretty tough in these sectors. I do think just going back to where we spend our money on, stimulus and that sort of standard response, almost a knee-jerk response, and I do think it's needed. I think the construction sector is one of the biggest in Australia, but the healthcare and social assistance sector is the biggest employer in our country, and it's a sector where there's not going to be significant reforms or stimulus because there's the reluctance because that significant reform or stimulus is long term. It's going to be locked in, and governments don't want to lock themselves into that sort of spending. With infrastructure, there's a belief, and to a degree there's that sort of short term spend. It can be within a 6-month, 12-month period, which is what we've seen with some of the housing stimulus. So that's why they focus there, and it happens to be the case that that's where men dominate as well. But we've seen some actually poor outcomes from that, and here in WA even, it's probably overstimulated at the moment. So we're seeing skills shortages, we're seeing prices push up way too rapidly, and it's not really going to do us any favours longer term. So we need something more sustainable. There's a real opportunity for structural reform, and that structural reform coming through the healthcare and social assistance sectors, coming through aged care, as Alison mentioned, coming through childcare. These are where we're going to get a real return on investment, and this is where we should be looking at making significant changes to these sectors.
Can I
Please,
jump in there? Because I think so Rebecca's sort of drawing a distinction between what you can do in the short term and what you can do in the long term. And look, I entirely agree with the point that one of the reasons we go back to infrastructure is that idea that you can kind of ramp it up quickly. You roll it out while you need jobs, and then it comes off. But I think that we actually need to think more creatively about temporary stimulus. I totally agree on the need for long-term structural reform, and we can kind of come to that. But given that 80% of jobs are in the services sector, given this recession was really different in that it was those sort of social consumption businesses that were hit harder. If we are going to have broad-based recovery from recession, we need to be able to think about how we create services jobs in a temporary way as well. So I'd really love to see some more creative thinking around this. One thing that Grattan put out during COVID, and which was picked up by both Victorian and New South Wales government, we were really delighted to see, was this idea of a intensive tutoring program to help students catch up on lost learning. The idea is, you employ graduates, people who we know suffer a lot in a downturn. They deliver small group tutoring, and that really improves student learning outcomes. And so that's just one example of something that is temporary, that does deliver something of long-term social value. So I would love to have a conversation about how we do more of this in other social services areas. Like, are there people we can roll out to help address loneliness, or visit people in aged care homes? Can we do things in the environmental rehabilitation space? I just think there's a lot of different programs we could look at that don't just involve kind of throwing more cash at transport infrastructure. And I would love to see, if there was a lesson to come out of this around stimulus, I would love if we thought more about this by the time, hopefully a while away, but by the time another downturn comes around.
As a long-term observer of politics, I think the hardest thing about infrastructure is that you get to stand in front of it, point to it and open it, which is a key element. I have a question for Alison, but before that, if you are at home, in your home office, or incredibly, even in an office, you can ask your own question using the Q&A chat function we'll get to. Alison, there is such scope for innovation. We have seen things in the past year that people have been fighting for 2 decades that have just happened in the snap of a finger, seemingly. Free childcare, working from home, the substantial changes to the economy. We've seen it happen. We've seen the change happen. What would you like to see happen in this year that you never waste a crisis? What would you do?
Well, to be honest, one of the things that we're very focused on is not letting people talk about the concept of going back to normal, and really trying to say what was good about what happened and what do we want to keep. And certainly from our point of view, that working from home did a number of positive things for women. Many of our women who typically worked at home and dialed into meetings suddenly found they were on a level playing field with everyone else who was also dialing in from home. So we want to keep that. Many women who weren't able to travel because of family commitments weren't able to participate in infrastructure projects or interstate projects and get greater experience. Now that our clients are used to the idea that they don't have to see you physically in the office to have somebody great working on the project, those opportunities have opened up for our women to work, whether it's from home or from the local office, on an interstate project and get great new experience and bring great new capability. So those things have been very important. The other thing I would say that if I look at, I guess, our workforce and the workforce of our clients, forcing everyone home has meant a whole lot of men that perhaps have never worked from home in their lives before and never had any idea that it was anything that you could possibly do, have now learnt to do it. And we're working really hard with them to say, just make sure that you don't think that you can come back now and leave your wife at home to juggle. You must both take responsibility, and you both bake in that flexibility and think about what's going to work for them. So to me, one of the things we're most focused on, not just in our own workforce, but across that sort of white collar sector, is trying to bake in and keep the things that have come so that we don't revert. And one of the real concerns when we started opening offices and things was that the men who'd been home sharing the care would go, look, my job's more important than yours. I'm going back now. You stay and juggle. And we've been really focused on that. And I would encourage all employers to really think hard about that and to be doing it. And some of the ways we've done it is just that age-old thing of our really senior leaders now role modelling. Sometimes they dial in from home and they're overt about it, and the dog's still in the background and things, even though the opportunity's there to go to the office, just to keep that flexibility alive.
It is 4 years, I think, today since a South Korean politics expert was being interviewed on the BBC and we discovered he had a family. He was actually the first person who's ever worked and had a family. So it was amazing we saw that. I do have more questions on working from home and unpaid work, but before I get to that, Rebecca, I am from the country in Gippsland in Victoria, and the country's always been waiting for a moment that would unlock access to jobs that don't physically or geographically exist where they are. I don't want to harp on about the fact that you are from Perth and you were there, but have you felt a change in that what was previously a substantial time and distance gap, that it might be bridged in some way?
I think for sure. And I'm actually, prior to the pandemic, I was actually based at home, working from home in Canberra for many years and traveling back and forth to Perth. So the pandemic actually got me to shift and move interstate. But I think what Alison said about, there's so many benefits from working from home. We're able to access labour, workers, all over the country. We don't have to necessarily come into the office. There's productivity gains from not actually travelling to and from meetings. We talked about that just before we went live, that you actually are, wasting a lot of time just travelling, getting to and from places. And I think there's a normalisation that's taken place that it has actually levelled that playing field for women. But at the same time, there is, I think, a real risk unless men start taking on more of the work at home. There's a real risk that women just end up doing more. But the flexibility, I think, in any sort of working arrangement, it's always going to be very useful for women in them being able to progress. But we must get men on flexible into that flexible work as well. There was some research that came out of, I think, the Melbourne Institute this week with Geordie Meeks and his co-author, talking exactly about this, that you need to, for the flexible work to actually be beneficial for women, men have to take it on. But I think for businesses in general, we're probably going to see a few things change, and I know there's some research around that kind of that lesser office space, that we don't need the office space anymore. So we're going to see some interesting trends in commercial property. But for gender equality, I think the working from home, being able to work remotely, this is going to open up doors for women. It's going to open up doors for a lot of people that are actually women and men, people that are less mobile in their ability to get around, that they actually can go for these jobs and potentially have the opportunity not to actually be physically located in the office. So I think we've got a lot of productivity gains here, and we should hold on to them.
See some questions coming in from the floor, so thank you for those. Just for Daniel, I mean, we've touched on it there. The second shift, the spectre of unpaid work, which is such a substantial part of the work conversation. Working from home has the potential to make that better, to have a better split across what are generally couples in this situation. It also has the potential to make it worse, as we've discovered, by people rushing back or seeking to, go back to what was. What does your research and what your opinion on what you think will happen through this really substantial, fast change to what's been a long-standing problem?
Look, it's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer. So I sort of agree with the optimism that both Alison and Rebecca have expressed about the opportunity here. So potentially this is a fantastic leveller. We know that at least in these sort of white-collar professional jobs, we can work from home. And what that means is there's much better opportunity if both parents take it up to share things like school drop-offs, etc. But it does come down to implementation, as I think Rebecca was saying there. There are some early concerning signs. So when businesses survey people about their intention to return to the office under this sort of hybrid world, more often it's men that say that they intend to return full time, and it's women that are most enthusiastic about taking advantage of the flexible work arrangements. What will that mean? Potentially it entrenches the status quo. It actually could even set us back if FaceTime continues to be rewarded and women are getting less FaceTime than they were before. That could hinder rates of promotion. And certainly not going to lead to an improvement on the home front. Of course, the other thing that will make potentially a big difference around women's workforce participation and the way they balance work and home is more affordable childcare, as you touched on before, Dan. Like, we know that this is a big barrier to workforce participation for women with younger children, especially. Grattan has done a lot of work on this, and it's absolutely extraordinary to me still that right across the income distribution, if you are second earner, and I don't like that term, but it does reflect the way that a lot of families make their financial decisions, it's simply not worth going to work beyond 3 days a week. You are losing 80, 90, in some cases 100% or more of your take-home pay after you build in tax, clawback of welfare benefits, and really importantly, those out-of-pocket childcare costs. So there's a huge policy dimension to this question as well. And as I like to say, yes, there's a cultural choice piece, but often policy drives culture. So we shouldn't underestimate what I think we could shift the dial on here in a policy sense.
Alison, you discussed the withdrawal of super, which obviously has a huge future impact. We're already seeing a decline in female workforce participation. We've seen the way that unemployment has gone through the economy kind of hit more female roles, industries, and types of work formats, part-time and casual, that women have been in. What can be done to turn that around? Because, if we don't, as you note, the future impact is going to be far greater than the just now impact.
Yeah. I'm absolutely with Danielle on really focusing more on making childcare properly affordable so that women aren't making that choice. The other thing that we're very focused on, and we'll be launching a paper in the next week or two on, is to actually move from allowing men to take parental leave to actually prioritising and having some use it or lose it arrangements to actively promote and push men to take childcare leave. We think as a long-term solution, if you get men involved in that work early at the start of their family life, it embeds that knowledge, and as importantly, it helps women going back to work to really focus on work in those first few weeks back after a period out in childcare, rather than juggling drop-offs and a whole lot of new complexity. If we can have women take a bit of time off, and then their partner takes some time off while they go back and focus maybe full-time for a few weeks on their career, and then both of them settle into something more normal. So we are very focused on paid parental leave and really pushing that at the policy level as a driver. And again, we were really focused on pushing employers to need to actively promote and champion it, because we do still know that a lot of men believe their employers look at them as not serious about their career if they take time off, and that needs to change as well.
Rebecca, I'll get to you with this, but I have a male friend who works at a positively Scandinavian organisation here who received months and months of parental leave. He's had 2 children and taken all of it. He has to go on panels and literally like desk to desk to try and convince guys to take months of fully paid leave. How much of it, Rebecca, can be changed with policy, and how much of it is cultural?
I think you can change, as Danny said, you can change it with policy, absolutely. But there's this underlying sort of cultural norms that are at play around women and men's roles. But we are seeing these change too. We're seeing them change generationally. So if we look at the World Values Survey and questions around whether or not there's a job shortage and whether women should get the job or a man, that's actually changing a lot. There's a whole heap of kind of attitudes that are moving more towards equity between men and women, but it is a slow burn and it is a generational burn. But policy can definitely quicken this. It can, and policies like Alison was talking about, employer policies where they actually do encourage and really encourage these men in their organisations to use it or lose it. I think these sorts of policies can make a big difference. And it does come through both government policy, but also through the big workforce, big organisations actually demonstrating this. I think from leadership, we know that leadership is what drives all sorts of behaviours in an organisation. And if there's a policy that it really very much encourages men to be taking this leave, to be sharing those caring arrangements, and that there's role modelling within these organisations, then we're going to see a big change. But just going back to, I just wanted to add a couple of comments around these lifetime earnings, superannuation gap. We are never going to see these close unless women start working in similar ways to men, so moving away from that part-time to full-time, and those barriers are completely removed. And whether that's men at home taking on more of the responsibility or the childcare coming into, I think the childcare is really the key. It's the key for lots of different reasons, including actually building that next generation, that early learning development that we need some intervention in as well. But importantly, women actually need to be paid in a way that's very similar once they're in that workforce to men, and that the gender pay gap is still sitting in our workforce, it's sitting in our labour markets economy. It is shifting, but for the very low paid workforce, it is not moving. And we need some real policy change here. We can't be adding tens of thousands of low paid workers every year and expect, first of all, our wages to grow. Secondly, the income pool to grow, but thirdly, for women to actually achieve anywhere near parity in the economic security and those lifetime earnings and superannuation that they're able to accumulate over their working life. It's just not going to happen, and we're going to keep seeing that divide between men and women. So women need to be able to access at least a similar average wage as men in the workforce when they do actually head out to work every day.
Just to wrap up that discussion before we move on to a new topic, people might not be aware, Danielle asked you, that Australia actually has very gendered industries. We actually have real splits within industries that you might be aware of and think of, stereotypically with certain jobs, but it's really evident.
Yeah, that's right. So we are much more gendered than a lot of similar countries. And, the point that Beck came to at the end there about the kind of women clustered in low paid jobs is such an important one. And a lot of those jobs are sort of the caring professions. And we know that not only are those jobs incredibly important, but they are really the jobs of the future. Like when you look at where the growth industry is going to be, it is in the sort of health, social care sectors. So there's aged care roles, childcare roles, disability support roles, incredibly gendered workforces. They're low paid, often not great conditions. And we've had a bit of a conversation about that during COVID, as Beck talked about before. But this is a really big challenge. How do we make these good jobs? How do we train the next generation? Because we're going to need thousands of new workers in these spaces. And I actually don't know what the answer to that is. A lot of this is deep-seated cultural factors at play. We haven't valued them, I think, because they are dominated by women, and we sort of expect women to selflessly deliver care work, and we haven't remunerated it accordingly. It's challenging because they're often mixed sectors. So you've got government playing a role, you've got private sector playing a role, you've got government putting subsidies in there. The fact that government is in there suggests that you can pull policy levers, but they're not straightforward. And one of the things that we recommended in our recent report, Women's Work, which was looking at the impact of COVID on women, is one thing we can do in the Build Back Better phase is actually take a serious look at this. We recommended an independent inquiry actually on these care workforces and looking at how we unpick these policy issues to make sure that they are good jobs and we're going to have the workers that we need in them.
And Danielle, before you move off that, one of the other frustrations with that is that education, health, and even the arts, whilst they're predominantly female workforce, they're predominantly male at the leadership level. And again, that probably does go back to childcare yet again, but it is particularly frustrating that even in those really female dominant sectors, the full-time, secure, well-paid leadership roles are still predominantly held by men.
And the pay gap in those female-dominated organisations is wider than the male-dominated organisations. So if you're a woman and in a management role, you're better off working in a male-dominated industry because you're going to get a closer pay to your male counterpart than what you might in a female-dominated sector.
We're just over halfway through. Obviously, we've got a lot of questions that we're going to get to. So we will move just to pure positivity now. And something that doesn't happen very often in journalism. But so I'll start with our host for today. I mean, how we have this opportunity. I mean, the title of today is to build back better. What would be the best thing that our leaders can do to in the coming years put us into a better position?
So look, I think there needs to be a recognition of the importance of care in the economy. So obviously there's lots of things that governments could do, but we're sort of coming here from a kind of women's economic security perspective. So what I think would be incredibly important is recognise these care industries as the industries of the future. As I said, we need to look at the piece around pay and conditions. We need to look at the affordability and access to care. So where childcare is concerned, that could be, you know, the bold move would be a push towards universal, affordable, maybe free childcare for everyone. So bringing in, you know, children under 5 into the early learning and care net, and making that affordable. That would make a big difference, as Beck said before, to those children. And we know so much now about, you know, the brain development that occurs in those early years. So there's a particular advantage there for the children from disadvantaged backgrounds having access to or exposure to those opportunities. So that's one piece. The other piece that goes with that is women's workforce participation that we've already talked about. And I think there's other parts of that care economy that we really need to look at seriously. And we've just seen the Aged Care Royal Commission deliver its report. It is, you know, pretty shocking reading. I can't say I've read all 8 volumes, but you know, it really puts forward the case that we need significant structural change in that sector. That's, you know, move to a rights-based approach rather than a rationed care approach. Is something that Grattan has been advocating for a long time. You know, I think that's what Build Back Better looks like. You know, delivering better care for older Australians is an incredibly important part of our national wellbeing. So there are a number of elements to this, but I think focusing on those care economy that's often overlooked in policy discussions is really important.
Also, you work at the top level of government and large business. Is there a sense that people want to do things differently, or is there just a desire to let's get back to 2019 and move like that?
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to get back to 2019. I think there's been a whole recognition that we can do a whole lot of things differently, more quickly, be more agile. I don't think anyone thinks that the pace of change will go back to as slow as it was before. So I think there is real appetite for change. I don't know that I have too many others to add to Danielle's idea. I mean, the observation for me in the private sector, and particularly in that big white-collar workforce, overwhelmingly it is fixing the childcare problem, fixing paid parental leave. I would say we often just talk to employers and they say, what can we do? We say, pay your women properly. You know, stop having the barriers within your pay and promotion and giving people the opportunities, and actually remove those structural barriers which exist in your own workforces. Pay your women properly and stop having excuses. So there are some things that you can do that will make a real change.
And Rebecca, just on that, we have this opportunity now. There's obviously this inflection point. There's been so much change. Do you think there's the capacity to have change? We've seen it in the past year, but now perhaps the imminent kind of health danger is gone. Is the capacity there, or do we just roll back?
I'd like to think that the capacity is there. I really would. We're not necessarily seeing incredibly strong signals, I think, from certain parties, I guess. But I'd like to think that there's some work being done. I think the government's got a great opportunity at the moment to actually they've got support of the community to be investing in and transforming the early childhood and education sector. This is where it's at. This is where the action is. This is where you unlock women, as Danielle's been talking about for a long time. You invest in those children when it's actually going to matter the most. At the moment, we have kids living in the most disadvantaged areas in Australia. They're 10 times less likely to be accessing the 15 hours of preschool that universally every child should be accessing at the moment. This is problematic. These are the kids that actually we want in these early childhood education care settings. If we transform the education, the early childhood education and care sector, and I want to keep calling it an early childhood education and care sector because that's what it is. If we transform this, we are going to release women. We are going to be able to remove those barriers from that sort of 3-day working week We're going to be able to invest in these kids, that, you know, the kids of the future. This human capital investment under 5 years of age is where we can make the biggest difference. It's where we can uncover any sort of developmental issues. It's where we can really build these children up and get them ready for school. This is where we should be really thinking about investing our money. The returns are going to be huge. It's really a no-brainer.
Off the back of that question, a question from independent economist Nikki Hartley. How do we change attitudes to shared, unpaid and kind of caring workloads faster than we currently are? And what can be done by governments and corporates? So I'll direct that to Alison. How can those attitudes be changed and at that larger level?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that is why we're very focused on paid parental leave at the moment, and actually focusing. And it's interesting because quite often government will say, well, why do you want paid parental leave? Because employers, you could just support that yourselves. And what we're actually saying is let's have some use it or lose it policies that actually really push people that they're losing out on a real opportunity to earn something different if they don't take it. Because we feel like once people have done that early in their working lives and got used to it, they can do it. And the other thing, again, we're very focused on within our own organisation is having every opportunity to your friend who keeps going on panels, every opportunity to profile and promote the success of the careers of the men who've done that. And sometimes what that means for us is that our very, very, very senior men and women are having to really role model, hey, I'm going home at 3 o'clock because I'm going to go and pick up my child in the middle and do things in the middle of the day. And I know it doesn't sound very groundbreaking, but it is that role modeling, because otherwise we talk all the talk and they look in the organisation and see that all the senior leaders are men who've got a wife at home who's looking after their children and supporting the whole family's needs. And I understand if that works for families, that I wouldn't want to denigrate that in any way, but it does. It's those patterns that 90% of the time are baked in, that the man's working and the woman's at home when the family's made that choice, that we need to try and normalise away from. So I don't have anything earth-shattering, I don't think, Daniel, but I think consistent, targeted, visible change and some financial policy relief through paid parental leave, I think, would start to really move the dial. There's been some studies in overseas places, Canada, I think, and that recently, that have done that with some considerable success.
Well, before we get to Rebecca, I've got a question from the floor, which I think you'll have some data behind, from Diane Emsley. Are there any policy ideas to support older women who may also have been lost their casual jobs through the employment, through the pandemic? Obviously, a huge cohort, and we know already the kind of financial issues in that group of older women. Are there any policy ideas that would assist when at the moment we seem to be getting things, for example, wage subsidies for people who are unemployed below the age of 35, that in many ways would seem to work against that group of people in society?
Yeah, look, a hiring subsidy is one way. There actually is an existing hiring subsidy for older workers. At the moment, that was in place before the pandemic, but this hasn't necessarily been working out, I think, how we expected to and how we want it to work out. And we know that women above, I think, age 50 are more likely now to be or quite overrepresented in unemployment benefits in JobSeeker, and that they're actually been there, very long term. So I think probably having a look again at that hiring subsidy and making sure it actually is effective and that it is working for these workers. But training is also something that we can look at as well. But there's a kind of a labour market mismatch, or a kind of something that's really not working to get these workers where they probably want to be and where they need to be. So having a look again at the hiring subsidy is probably one of the best ways.
Can I kind of jump in on that one as well? I just and probably being an economist, I would say this, but I think that the absolute best thing we can do for all workers, men and women, young and old, is to get our macroeconomic policy settings right. So at the moment, even though jobs have come back faster than any of us were anticipating, and that's great news, unemployment's still expected to be well above what we call the natural rate of unemployment, the point beyond which, you get wages growing because labour markets are so tight. That's not supposed to happen for at least another 3 years. I think that's too high for too long. And so the argument really is that government should continue to support the economy, to run the economy faster, to create more jobs and get things moving. And, that's where the debate's going overseas. We've had a really strong signal from the Biden administration and their economic team that they're just going to keep pushing until they've got unemployment with a 4 or a 3 in front of it. That would be great news for everyone that's lost their job in Australia. And we certainly think there's a lot more that the government could do to be building back activity and jobs faster.
And also coming to the end of the JobKeeper wage subsidy, which is still supporting 1.5 million people. And research from Jeff Borland across the road suggests that between 125 and a quarter of a million of those people will join the queue. I have probably the hardest question, and as ever, it doesn't come from the journalist. So Janesse Gardner says there's a lot of agreement here about the solutions to improving women's economic outcomes generally and in workplaces specifically. We've seen the capacity to make change quickly. So what are you seeing as the barriers to just getting on and implementing these policies? Who would like to go first? Not me.
Why don't I have a go from the government policy side, where others may fear to tread, and maybe others will have a go on the corporate side. But my sense is that this hasn't been a priority issue for one reason or another. And I'm going to put something out there that's slightly controversial, but if you look at kind of major economic policy decision makers in this country, it has been kind of a largely male shop for a long time. So, we've had a female prime minister, but never a treasurer. We've had a female chief justice of the High Court, but never headed one of our big economic agencies. So Treasury, RBA, PC, ACCC, and also senior ranks have also been dominated by men. Now that is changing, but I do genuinely think that affects the conversation. So I've certainly been in rooms where I've been talking about these disincentive effects on workforce participation because, as I said before, women are losing 80, 90, 100% of their take-home pay. And people are like, oh, wow. I didn't even realise that was a thing. So even though we spend a lot of time hand-wringing about the top marginal tax rate and the impact of that on workplace incentives, there's this other massive incentive problem that isn't even on some people's radar. I think that is actually part of the story. So I think, putting this up in lights is incredibly important to shift that. I still suspect there will be some resistance, and that's partly why we've been so keen to kind of tell the economic story here. So it's one thing to make the argument on equality and the social grounds, and I personally think those arguments are incredibly important and persuasive. But for others, to persuade, you need to tell the story of how that's going to benefit economic activity and growth. So I think putting that lens on it, which is a genuine lens, will hopefully help persuade people just how important this is.
I'm just going to say there was a time until the quite recent past when there genuinely was a gender lens put over every aspect of the budget, and I really do think that reinstating that would be a massive help to the sorts of examples that you've just given, and do a much better job of highlighting areas where we can make change.
It's actually really strange. I think what Danny's saying is right. Like there's just kind of there's not enough diversity at the decision making tables, and I think even the Expenditure Review Committee, one of the most powerful committees in government, until recently it had there's no women sitting on that committee, and so they're not going to think about things from a woman's lived experience. I think even the Social Service Minister, one of the biggest spending portfolios, that position was actually not on the Expenditure Review Committee for a very long time and has only just been moved in there. So having that diversity of thought and backgrounds and lived experiences is really important for policy. I think also there's just this inertia and this idea, and we're already back to the dialogue of the budget needs to come into surplus. And this idea that we can't spend beyond, and that this is our KPI, and we have to get back to this KPI. The media sort of jumps on as well, Dan, a little bit on this budget surplus. And, I get asked all the time, when's the budget going to come back into surplus? And my last response is, let's stop talking about it. Let's actually start talking about some other KPIs. Let's talk about quality jobs. Let's talk about the well-being and health of Australians. Let's talk about investment in our kids and in those early years. These are the KPIs that treasurers should be held account by, and governments held account to. So I think we need to actually shift that conversation. It takes a lot of us to help with that. But it's almost perplexing, because if this investment has happened, if we actually saw some big reforms here, especially in childcare, you would make a lot of women very happy. And it doesn't sort of make sense politically, if you're coming at it from that lens, why you wouldn't actually start thinking about doing this. I mean, there's so much evidence to show, there's such a big benefit here. But politically, I'm not sure why you wouldn't actually be looking at these things, because we know that this is the current environment to actually make big changes and big reforms in, and you should be grabbing a hold of that while you can.
Can I just quickly jump in on that politics point, because I think that's really interesting. So, when families at this point in their life, this is a major issue for them. So I agree that I think there's political upside to tackling it. Often, I think that message doesn't get through to elected representatives. So I've had them say, this isn't coming back to me in surveys of my electorate as a major issue. And I sort of say, well, in one way, that's not surprising, because this is impacting people for a segment of their lives incredibly intensely, but it is just a segment. So you're not going to have people in their 50s and 60s talking about this as their number one priority. Second of all, this is the busiest group in our community. The families that are juggling work and young children are not the ones that are filling out surveys and sending them back to politicians. They just don't have time to do so. And I think that's a challenge, because we know that actually raising issues with elected representatives and getting in their face can, help shift the dial on policy issues. And I think this is a group that just hasn't got time to engage. So it's even more important, I think, that other groups take up the mantle on behalf of busy parents.
Yeah, certainly when there's, we talk about kind of structural intergenerational inequality, I always do make the point that, the young parents, they would march if they weren't kind of fully engaged in the system that they're in. Alison, before we move on from that point, it has been a year for big change. The government's doing big, unexpected, ideologically difficult things that they never would have thought of previously. Is 2021, is there a possibility of more big steps in these fields where previously there have been so many barriers? The research has been done. We know we've got international experience. A lot of this stuff is very evidence-based. You put the money in, you get more out. Is this a time where big steps are possible?
It's not feeling like there's much appetite for it, is it? Is it? So in theory, as you said, you should never waste a good crisis, and you might think that there should, but I'm not sensing on the back of everything that's had to happen now. And I think that's probably why we've gone back to that same playbook around infrastructure and some of the things that we've done before.
Look, thank you so much for your time. Let's give a final observation from each of our panellists, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you for your questions on the Q&A. Associate Professor Rebecca Castle from Bankwest Curtin Economic Centre. We're going to finish this. You can leave people with a thought. As we have got through this period and now we look at a new normal, what can we do? What's available?
I'm going to go back to this again, Dan, and I know that I've talked a lot about childcare, early childhood education and care. I talk about it every time I'm asked by any journalist, what is the number one policy reform, or name three. I will always name one, and this is it. This is the time to make these changes. This is absolutely what we need for the future. It's what we need for women. It's what we need for gender equality. We should be really looking to make some changes in this sector.
Alison Kitchen, Chairman of KPMG, one of Australia's largest global consulting firms. You are in the room where it happens. You talk to people at the highest levels. What do you tell them about what the economy could be?
Look, I hate to say this, Dan, but I'm right with Rebecca. I say to them at the moment, the biggest single change that you can make to really shift the dial on women's issues at the moment is childcare. So if you wanted me to give you a last thought, Dan, you started the day by saying that you were scared of talking to enraged women, that you've been doing that all week. I actually think that there's a little bit of momentum happening at the moment around women saying now is the time when we need to stop being always in the background and thinking of everyone else first, and we need to fix this once and for all. So I would probably encourage, if our audience today, which I think it is predominantly women, I think now is the time for us all to be quite noisy and pushy and demanding, and perhaps that will get some attention. So that would be my last thought.
Oh, thank you. Danielle, obviously the report is available. If people haven't read it, it is on the Grattan website. It is an easy read that will really lay out some of the issues in this field. We've had the crisis, we're in the recovery, many elements have gone well. What would you like to see from here?
Thank you. And I also just want to say thank you to Extra Foundation for supporting that work. And I think it's incredibly important that we put out research and advocacy in this space. So I really thank them for that. So, you know, the take-home messages from the report, we've sort of touched on all of them, but I think it is worth just reiterating, you know, that idea of a gender lens around decision making is incredibly important. And I think if we did have a gender budget statement, the October budget might have looked different, because the point is that when you ignore gender, you overlook things. And I think there were, it was very male skewed in terms of the direct support measures. So one, I would like to see gender budgeting back. Two, I would like to see more creative thinking about economic stimulus and how we get service industries involved. And three, I would like to see a major rethink on the care economy. So that includes childcare, it includes aged care, and it includes how we make these good jobs, because ultimately, you know, the way in which we interact with the economy and live our lives, the care sector is so important. None of us want to be in a world where our children are not getting a good education. None of us want to be in a world where we need to move into aged care and we're not going to be treated with dignity and respect. So, you know, these things matter for quality of life beyond the GDP numbers. This is really important. This is the way Australians live, and this is what we care about. So let's take the time now and get it right.
Thank you very much for your time, to our panelists, to everyone tuning in at home, on the couch, or in the home office. Thank you for your time. The report again is available at the Grattan Institute website. You can read it there. Thank you.